Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We are starting at 12:35 as promised. We just gave your colleagues a 5-minute wait time to join us. I'm Nichelle Grandison, the founder of the Caribbean Strategy Summit and the MD for Strategy Plus Consultant. And we want to welcome you today to the CSS 2024 Webinar Wednesday series, Breaking Barriers and Overcoming Obstacles in Strategy Execution. So leading up to the summit, every year, Strategy Plus and BSI, we usually host a series of webinars to assist in sparking your enthusiasm for the upcoming CSS Summit by providing an overview of each of the symposium feature lectures, as well as current content on riveting strategy topics. Just a mere preview of the summit events and offering a hint of the strategy execution gems that lie ahead. So I'm sure you would have attended our first. That was about 2 weeks ago. We have one more to go on June 12th, so feel free to register for that one as well. Today, our topic is going to be on strategy execution, of course, but this time on obstacles and solutions. And we have no other than Howard Rom with us today. He'll be presenting on this topic. Howard Rom is the founder of the Strategy Management Group and the co-founder and president of the Balanced Scorecard Institute. He's a performance management trainer, consultant, and technologist with over 40 years experience. Howard has trained over 3,000 strategic management professionals from over 50 countries globally and helped dozens of organizations worldwide to build a balanced scorecard and performance planning and management systems. And of course, a wealth of knowledge on strategy, execution, and practical skills. So I'm here to hand you over now to Howard. Over to you.
So much, Michelle. Nice to be on the circuit with you again, presenting a webinar. Look forward to these every year. It's been sort of a career journey for me to collect enough material to talk about strategy execution. We've been looking at this topic for 25 years with the Institute, and for me, decades before that. And a lot of the material on strategy execution I found deals with leadership, with governance, with communication, with project management. All those things are important, of course, but what we found with our research is that there's other things you can do, other things you can focus on that'll give you a better chance of success. So this presentation is about that. We're going to try and walk you through some obstacles that we have seen and more importantly, some tools that we have used to try and make strategy execution more efficient and more effective. And we'll go into more at the Caribbean Summit that Michelle has talked about next month. We're recording the webinar, and we'll send you a link. We'll provide a handout, PDF, and we encourage questions. Please use the Q&A box, not the chat box for questions. I've been doing this for a long time, as I mentioned, working on some ideas on how to make strategy execution more efficient and more effective. So this is the 30-minute version of that. We've worked for close to 400 organizations around the world now since we started the Institute in the late 1990s, and have taught and trained in 7 languages now. So let's take a look at some of the obstacles and challenges, and then I want to share with you some of the tools and techniques that we use on the consulting side, and we train when we're doing a training course, that we found to be especially helpful over the years. And a seminal article in 1999, 40 executives were interviewed by Fortune magazine authors as to why they failed in their positions and were removed from their positions. And in 70% of the cases, the authors found that it was due to a failure to execute strategy. So that's our starting point, is how do we lower that percentage? How do we do a better job on executing strategy? When we looked at all of the different ways we could present information on strategy execution, it sort of came down to organizing in a disciplined way what we have learned and what tools we have used. And so we call these 5 categories the strategy execution imperatives. We think of them as a bridge between the strategy development, the formulation, the strategic plan, and the successful implementation of that strategy. So we're going to look at some examples of things that have worked for us in each of these categories and share them with you. Hopefully you'll find a tool or two that you can use to start improving your organization's strategy implementation success. One of the things we've learned, it's pretty easy to talk about the symptoms of what goes wrong, the failures. It's much harder to talk about the root causes. Why exactly are we not performing like we want to on the plan? So some challenges, the ones highlighted here, I'm going to present some ideas on how you can add more discipline to a process of implementing strategy. In the leadership and governance category, we have failures of goals, of communication, of structure, of lack of disruption planning. On alignment, a lot of examples of alignment failures because the units, the business units and the employees or teams of employees are really not aligned. When you ask an employee on the shop floor, how does what you're doing fit in with the goal of the organization? Sometimes we get lucky and someone will respond with a substantive answer. Many times it's a blank stare. On project portfolio management, we want to align those to strategy and have more of a strategic initiative set. Performance culture failures, resistance to change is a key one that we'll be talking about today. And then on performance reporting, analysis, and informing, the wrong measures, too many measures, breakdowns in how we report performance information, and finally, unintended consequences of measurement. I'm reminded of a story out of India where the government put a program in to pay a bounty on snakes. The city is overrun by snakes, and the program was judged a success until they realized that some of the farmers on the outside of the city were actually breeding snakes for purposes of getting the bounty collection. So what appeared to be a successful program turned out to be not so successful. Poor strategy execution doesn't start at the last link of that chain I showed you at the start, which was labeled implementation or strategy execution. It starts much earlier. One of the things we look at is it a poor strategy? Is it poor implementation? Is it a good strategy but poor implementation? There's a lot of combinations of things that can go wrong. Some of the things we've seen on the front end are an endless planning process, right? So that the plan is almost out of date by the time it's approved. Too much emphasis on planning and too little on subsequent implementation. We see a lot of plans that are just initiatives or projects or activities. They really don't deal with what are the strategic outcomes that are desired, the end outcomes, the accomplishments, the results. That's what a strategic plan should highlight. And then the operating plans can follow behind with more specifics on programs and activities. We see limited ownership and accountability, right? Sometimes hiding behind committees and meetings. not very good communication around goals or no clear goals at all. Specific examples of when you work at the the leadership level, the C level suite, everybody has a pretty good understanding of what the goals are. But you go down 2, 3, 4 levels in an organization, to the desktop or the shop floor. And when we do that, it's very rare that we get somebody who can articulate what the corporate goal is and relate the work that they do to that goal. A lot of times we'll see nice vision statements. They sound pretty clever, but they don't, they're happy words, right? They don't really tell you what the goal is or what the organization is trying to become over some time period. Alignment is a problem between the corporate level. We call that tier 1. Business and support units, departments, branches, and so on, tier 2, and also with employees at what we call tier 3. And many times we see way too many measures and way too little information. There's a lot of things that we can work on here on our challenges list. So let me get to the solutions. Creating a list of obstacles and challenges and failures is sort of the easy part. But let's try and deal with the hard part, which is what are some best practice tools and techniques that might help you. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about something called a SE roadmap. What you're seeing today is a preview of a new 4-day certification course that we do with George Washington University and the Institute to certify strategy execution professionals. We have started to roll that course out live and via the internet. It's 4 days. There are 5 authors from the Institute that have put this course together. A combined 100+ years of experience has gone into creating this new course and identifying tools and techniques and interventions that will help you. One of the key deliverables out of that course is something called a strategy execution roadmap. Each individual delegate will create in class with the help of the instructors a specific roadmap for their organization. It starts with obstacles and challenges, and then deals directly with what are we going to do about it. After all these years, I always like to start with the great Stephen Covey quote, start with the end in mind. If there's one key takeaway from all of my years of experience, this is it. You will end up in a much better place if you start with what you're trying to accomplish than if you start with what you're currently working on. Most organizations get it wrong. They start workshops and meetings and strategy planning by talking about what are we currently working on, what projects do we have. I guarantee you that if you start with a simple question, what are we trying to accomplish, and work backwards, you will end up in a very different place and a very better place than if you start with what you're currently working on. So let's look at a tool, a goal setting tool. Organization goals, right? Typically serve 4 functions: guidance, planning, facilitation, motivation, and evaluating and controlling performance. I like this layout because it sort of forces you to think about goals from different points of view, from the strategic point of view, from the overall corporate or enterprise-wide point of view, through the eyes of the employee, through the eyes of business operations, through the eyes of societal impacts, and finally through the eyes of projects. When you have these conversations, you have different hats on. The conversations are different. And it really helps if you have a disciplined way of thinking about these things, rather than sort of, as we've seen in many meetings, you just sort of lump them all together. The wrong question is, what should our goals be, right? The right question is, let's think about our strategic goals first, and let's get agreement on those. Right? And then let's work down the other types of goals until we get a consistent set that makes sense, right? And can be sold to the boards, sold to the ministries, sold to the mission-driven organizations in a logical, cohesive, and simple to understand manner. So one of the exercises in the course, for example, is going to be to fill out a table, something like this, a graphic with the goals, examples from your organizations, and start to get you thinking in a disciplined, organized way about goal setting. You know, we hear a lot of cliches about the culture, strategy, a lot of cute phrases. You know, the reality is you need to worry about both if you're in the strategic planning business, strategy management business. One without the other doesn't work very well. And on the culture side, you're trying to get to an adaptive culture rather than an unadaptive culture. And the course goes into some detail about some assessments that you can use to do that. But you know, what we found is that you have to pay attention to both streams. On the change management side, we like John Kotter's model to help you move from an adaptive culture or from an unadaptive culture to an adaptive culture. Again, it's disciplined. You know, you can create checklists of how we're doing against some best practice standards. It gives you a way of organizing the culture dimension. Another tool we like is the internal communication matrix. Really force yourself to create a communication plan. And in essence, translate the language of corporate enterprise to the language of the desktop or the shop floor. Right? If we're talking to the board, we talk one language. If we're talking to the folks on the shop floor, we're talking a different language. And by organizing the behaviors that we want, the resistance that we're going to face, what pains or what's in it for me, WIFMs, are being solved. What are the messages? What's the media? Who's the messenger? And what's the timing? Those are the four critical things in a communications plan: message, messenger, timing, and media. And so we'll go through and actually, for each one of the target audiences, create some examples. And we'll force ourselves to think through, for that particular level, for that particular audience, what are the things that are driving behaviors in those areas. So this makes a very nice tool for the for HR, for leadership, for managers to really sort of stay on the same script, so that a message that comes out of what I call the seventh floor, the C-level, gets translated correctly to the shop floor. Another tool that I use all the time, used for almost 30 years, is to take an inventory of where things stand against best practices. For those of you who have bought our book, we wrote a book 10 years or so ago called The Institute Way. There's an appendix in there called Characteristics of Good. And for each one of the components of strategy, we've done the research and figured out what makes what we call characteristics of good. You know, I can't exactly claim best practices because I haven't seen everything, but we certainly know what we have observed that works and some things we've seen that don't work very well. So just the simple inventory, this spreadsheet of the components. Have we reviewed them? Are they acceptable against characteristics of good? Do we even have them, or do we need revisions? It really creates a work plan, if you will, for creating a management system that supports whatever strategy you're creating. It's a very powerful tool to start a workshop off with. Another tool we like is, you know, again, on the front end here, getting your strategy to the point where it can be clearly communicated. It's something called a strategy profile or strategy campus from the folks who created the Blue Ocean concept. This is an example of Southwest many decades ago trying to figure out how to be a different airline than American and Delta and United and TWA and Pan Am and all the airlines that were flying back in that day. So they created a set of what I call levers or market differentiators on where they wanted to put more emphasis and where the emphasis in other airlines was currently. So they could immediately see and communicate to others that they wanted to understand what they were working on for a strategy, where the focus was going to be, and where they think they had a competitive advantage. We've used this for government agencies to develop more cost-effective programming. We've used it for mission-driven nonprofits to make sure that they are leveraging their best assets to secure more members and satisfy the missions that they have created for themselves. Once again, very powerful tool. Notice all these tools are really simple, right? We try and simplify the complicated, I guess, is one of the mantras of the Balanced Scorecard Institute and the Strategy Management Group. We want to make things more simple so people will understand them and they'll actually use them and follow through. So once again, a really nice tool. Probably in my humble opinion, the most significant tool created in the last couple of decades, something called a strategy map, taken from the Kaplan and Norton Balanced Scorecard work that they started. I came up with a concept of 4 specific perspectives that you can view strategy through. Starting at the bottom, they called it learning and growth. We expanded it to include organizational capacity because you're interested in much more than just knowledge transfer from employees. You're also interested in the tools and facilities and infrastructure and other things. So we thought organizational capacity better represented what that perspective was. Business processes deal with efficiency, stakeholder, customer deal with satisfaction, financial deals with financial performance. This is for a private sector organization. If we were doing this for a government or a mission-driven, we would reverse the top 2 rows so that customer and stakeholder at the top. This is a value creation story. This is your value creation story. The objectives are the ovals on the chart. And in the case of a mission-driven or government, for example, the end of the value chain is through the eyes of a citizen or through the eyes of a member of a foundation. Or it is some satisfaction for some individual or group of individuals. And then financial in a government or a mission-driven sense becomes stewardship because you're essentially using other people's money and you want to use that wisely. So we make that switch when we are doing work for other than private sector. The top 2 perspectives are your results perspectives, and the bottom 2 perspectives are the drivers of those results. So a simple example, this is a if-then logic chart. It's not a systems chart. It's not a process flow chart. It's an if-then logic chart. It takes some days in a workshop with different voices from an organization to create this, but it is an extremely powerful tool that allows you to communicate your strategy visually throughout an organization. So in this case, if I improve knowledge and skills of my employees, and I improve the tools and technology they use, that should lead me to improve process efficiency. Remember, this is a hypothesis based on the best folks you can find in your organization, excuse me, who will help you create this. Increased process efficiency should lead to a lower cycle time, which will lower the wait time, which will improve customer retention, leading to increased revenue. Lower wait time also will lower costs. Both of those will increase profitability. An oversimplification, generic, to be sure, you'll change these words for your organization to make it more realistic, but you get the idea on this. Very powerful tool. The big thing is it really does facilitate what we call strategic conversations, and it does so in an organized and disciplined way. I'll keep coming back to this. Organization discipline, use a framework so that you can organize and simplify the complexity of this strategy and strategic management space that we live in. Another tool that we created a one-page balanced strategic plan that communicates the strategy and connects the dots to strategic projects. So in this case, for example, this one-page strategic plan talks to the strategic intent, the context, what you're trying to accomplish through 3 high-level pillars of excellence for strategic themes. For each theme, a goal or a strategic result is created that's measurable. Once we have that, we can create the strategy map of objectives, tell the value creation story, and we can assign performance measures based on those objectives. Not asking folks, what should we measure? But now we have a disciplined way of saying, what should we measure? That's a big difference. And then finally, from a project management point of view, identifying a set of initiatives that are designed to close the performance gap in those strategic objectives. So what I've done from an altitude point of view with this is go from mission and vision at 30,000 feet, down to ground level at the projects and initiatives. And I've done it in an organized way that connects the dots. What's the result of that? It's much easier to communicate what you're trying to accomplish. And then specifically, what are the programs, projects, and initiatives you're going to put in place to accomplish that? Another tool that we like is deals with alignment. We treat alignment as part of strategy execution. It can actually stand alone. If you remember that chain links that I showed you at the start, strategy alignment, strategic alignment can actually stand alone, but we have decided to put it in with strategy execution because it's such an important part. So again, the discipline of how do we get from high altitude down to the shop floor, down to our employees, right? The mission, vision, and values drive the selection of the strategy, the development of goals. That drives the selection of strategic objectives. And then finally, our actions, our budgets, our incentive programs, the initiatives, and so on fall out of that. Once again, a logic, discipline, a simpler way of thinking about things. Alignment is really about cascading objectives. What you'll find if you adopt the mindset that strategic objectives are probably the most important thing you can focus on if you're a strategic planner or a strategy person. They literally are the DNA of strategy. And you get an awful lot of mileage if you get those strategic objectives right. There's a lot of things that derive from those that will make strategy execution easier. Corporate level is tier 1, business and support units, tier 2, and then personal objectives or team objectives for people who are doing the same job would be tier 3. This kind of a cascade doesn't imply command and control or top-down rigidity. I mean, it really is a strategic process of translating the language of tier 1 into the language of business and support units and individuals, what they work on and what their individual development plans are. Another tool that we like a lot is a tool for putting discipline in the performance measurement or KPI development process. Just like in goals, there are different types of measures. They're listed here: inputs, process, outputs, project on the operational and project side, and impact or outcome measures on the strategic side. And so we pick and choose what we want to report when we do our software reporting. Again, you're going to have different hats on when you talk about these different types of measures. There are different conversations when you talk about end outcomes as compared to inputs. I reflect back on my work as a government executive in Washington, D.C. for many years. when the Government Performance Results Act came out in the early 1990s. The whole idea behind that legislation was to try and get government agencies to stop thinking about FTEs and fiscal year budgets as standalones and start to think about intermediate and end outcomes from those programs, so that one really could start measuring the success of different programs and make comparisons among the programs as to which are the most cost effective. So this is an example of the logic model. That's been a tool available for many years, and we still use it, still like it. Related to that is what I call the fishbone or Ishikawa diagram, which identifies the measures that matter. Once again, this tool is going to help with conversations. That's the whole idea, to make discipline, put in place a disciplined process of communicating about what's important to the organization. So I start with a strategy. This one is one of those strategic themes that we see a lot, called operational excellence. What's the result that we want? And what are some of the components of an objective that comes about from that strategic theme? Improve customer satisfaction. And then down below, what are some of the performance measures that we might consider? The key with performance measures is not to start a meeting with what should we measure. That's the wrong question to ask to start. Start the meeting with what are we trying to accomplish? And then the second question is, how will we know success when we see it? Tell me a story, paint a picture of what success looks like in that particular area, like customer satisfaction. Make it visual, make me see a picture of what success looks like. And the third question is, how will we measure that success or progress toward that success? And that's where the question of what should we measure comes in. So many organizations get that right. They don't do steps 1 and step 2, and they jump to, I got 10 people in the room. What do you all think? What should we measure? And that's the extent of the thinking on performance measurement. That's a recipe for way too many measures that are meaningless. So the goal here is to find the few measures that matter, not the many that we could think of if we asked the wrong question, which is, what should we measure? So just, to summarize quickly, we have a one-day version of this course that we're going to be giving at the Caribbean Conference. And then, of course, there's the 4-day full certification version of the course, where we actually each of the authors works with individual delegates to create their own roadmap. So it's sort of a training course with a consulting add-on, I guess I would say, in these five areas. One of the things that we've created as another tool is a strategy execution assessment. This is an example for the leadership and governance imperative. We use a Likert scale, 7 scores, 1 through 7. And you can take that survey here. The idea is we broke leadership and governance, each of the imperatives, into some components, and then created some statements as to where you currently are on a scale of 1 to 7 in these statements. And this also will help you create your roadmap of what you want to focus on first, and how you want to organize your strategy execution effectiveness plan. I mentioned professional certification, brand new course, 5 years in the making, and you can get more information about that. This is what the roadmap looks like as it's filled in. This is again for leadership and governance. Components are listed on the left, the desired outcomes that we want. In the second column, baseline, the current status is in the third column. What are the challenges? What are the failures, obstacles? Next, what are we going to do about it? This would be improvements. And then who owns this activity and what's the priority? So at the end of the workshop, you'll end up with 5 of these. that represent a roadmap for each of those 5 imperative areas. Thank you so much for your attention. Hopefully you've learned something that you can use, hopefully almost immediately, take back with you to your organization and improve the effectiveness of your strategy execution process. I'm
So,
gonna
so
stop
far,
that.
I think it's just one question I'm seeing there, Howard. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
And that's from Emily. Can you specify how to establish performance culture, and please do not stick to measures and KPIs?
Say the first part again, Michelle, please.
Can you specify how to establish a performance culture, and please do not stick to measures and KPIs?
Measures and KPIs are not the right
Mm.
way to think about a performance culture, that's for sure. We have a a whole chapter on that. The idea is to most organizations have an unadaptive culture, and we actually have an assessment tool that we use to measure the degree of unadaptiveness and then create a plan with leadership coaching and communications, and the John Kotter framework is a way of getting folks more on board with creating a performance culture. I mean, first you have to understand what the root causes are that are causing culture toxicity. Then you have to think about each of those, both individually and then collectively, and ask yourself, what can we do different that we're not doing today to improve that? Is it a communications intervention? Is it training? Is it leadership coaching? Is it goal setting? So a lot of the things, a lot of the tools that I talked about that are not measures and KPIs are aimed at exactly those underlying issues that cause cultures to be toxic. Lack of clarity. Communications is a big one. Lack of leadership skills is another one. A board that is not effective. Guidance is not coming down. Overlapping roles between the board and the executive. Lack of a strategy focus on the board can trickle all the way down into the organization. Too much work with too little resources affects the culture. The key is for individual employees to find their WIFM. I found. I'm reminded of a story. We did the work at the Susan Komen Foundation in Dallas, and after they completed their balanced scorecard work, they did a video interviewing all the folks who were working on the team. We had 30 or 40 folks engaged in that. So we had different voices in the room to make sure that we're dealing with culture at the same time we're dealing with strategy. Because the key is, not to have a few people build a strategic plan and then, pass it down from above. The key is to get the people who are responsible, going to be responsible for the performance, to be part of that process. That's one big takeaway of what we do differently than a lot of other consultants do. We build the strategy with the folks who are going to be responsible for it, so that you're building buy-in right from day one. That changes the culture around the organization, because it's not Howard Rome's goal, right? It's the team's goal, and you're part of the team. It makes a huge difference. So there's some things like that you can do that make a big difference with performance. Understanding the different views of the generations is another one. We think differently, us old guys, than the younger folks do. How do you reflect that in the culture so you have a mix of both, and successfully work with each other? Now, there's a lot of elements to it. It doesn't lend itself to a simple answer, but you sure can work on the things that are important, like communication and governance and leadership and so on, to make a difference.
Okay, so next up, Howard, we have, thank you for the nice, powerful compilation of strategy analysis, comms tools, discussion guides that have existed for many years. but what is new or different that solves the 70% execution failure rate?
Well, what's new and different is, more emphasis on clear communication, more emphasis on clear goal setting, more emphasis on fewer planning meetings that drag out for a long time, more emphasis on building a coalition of the willing, as John Kotter recommends, more emphasis on the right measures, more emphasis on aligning the organization around strategy, more emphasis on the way you report performance information. It goes right down to which chart do I use to make to tell the story of what I'm trying to tell the best. And we go into quite a bit of detail in the course on that, picking and choosing the right way of communicating performance information. So those are all examples.
Okay, good stuff. Next from Thana, is it possible that the processes and procedures in the organization are an obstacle to the strategy?
Absolutely. What we always like to do is start with customer-facing processes and work backwards, looking for the bottlenecks and the potential for process improvement, for reducing waste, eliminating steps, and breaking the log jams. So absolutely, process improvement is one of the key components of it.
Okay. From Ferdinand, how do you build a performance culture? How can I go about it in a simpler, in simple terms?
There are a lot of different models out for change, for culture. We like John Kotter's ADKAR is another one we used to use. In the course, I think we talk 6 or 7 different models of culture and change. Choose one, doesn't have to be Kotter's, and just stick with it. I mean, it's that discipline again that runs through all of my recommendations. Stick with a framework and get the benefits of that organized thinking. That's really what it's about.
From Kyle, could you elaborate, he has evaluated, but elaborate on how strategy adapts to emerging market trends and technology advancements, and how can you ensure it remains flexible and responsive?
We see a lot of organizations that do not incorporate disruption planning as part of the strategy development process. And same with innovation. They seem to be somewhat afterthoughts in many organizations. I'm reminded of a story. There was a volcanic eruption in Iceland, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And air flights in Europe were and East were shut down because of the ash floating over the continent. And one of the distribution companies, I can't remember whether it was FedEx or UPS or one of the other ones, had put in place a contingency plan, not for a volcano, but for any disruption that would shut down airplane traffic and keep them from delivering cargo. So they actually went to, trucks and literally bicycles and local transportation to avoid the problems that shutting down the airline traffic did for several months. So there's an example of disruption planning without knowing exactly, what the disruption is going to be, but having thought through some things that you can do if that situation arises. So disruption planning and innovation planning earlier in the cycle as part of the strategic conversations, I think would be a good add.
Okay. So we have a lot of them coming in. What are the thresholds if we see in the phase of strategy developing phase, there will be a risk of poor strategy execution? Okay, let me see if I can rephrase that for them. Mm. Well, I guess they're trying to ask here, if there's a risk of poor strategy execution, what should you be looking for, I guess, in your strategy development phase when setting thresholds? Yeah, I hope I rephrased that right. Mm-hmm.
Well, we covered that a little bit, didn't we, about creating clear goals at the start, making sure your leaders and managers are the right messengers with the right messages. There's another tool that I didn't show you called the 7 C's of communication, which is a checklist on presentations and messaging. And that's very handy to grade, what the communications and what the messaging is. I tell you another thing that we've seen successfully over the years. I'll go back to the Susan Komen example. The new CEO, after we finished the balanced scorecard work, held an all hands meeting, an all world meeting, really, at a large hotel in Dallas, and then had video feeds from folks around the world. And when they rolled out the new strategy, they did it in a very organized way with the strategy map. We had a great big 4-foot by 8-foot foam board of the strategy map up on the stage. And the CEO asked everybody in the room to come up and sign their name next to one of the objectives that they could personally influence, in a very powerful way of getting folks on board to the new strategy. So that's one thing that you can do. Think for ways of how you turn a strategy event into a people event, an emotional buy-in event. It'll help. Don't think of strategy in the academic sense, think of it in the people sense.
Okay. One other thing, can you explain the difference between strategy and objectives?
Well, strategy, exists at different levels in an organization, right? There's corporate strategy, there's operational strategy, there's even project strategy. So you really have to say what level of the organization. I mean, strategy deals with accomplishments and outcomes, right? And to me, the difference between that and planning is specifics, activities, programs, projects. Objectives are just a subset of the strategy. If your corporate strategy, let's say, exists at 30,000 feet, let me use the altitude example. Your strategic objectives are at 25,000 feet, just by way of example, 20,000 feet. They're a subset of the strategy. And remember, I'm defining strategy to be 3 or 4 pillars of excellence that the organization is desires. Right? So you start at the top: mission, vision, core values, right? You do your scenario analysis, you do your innovation planning, and so on. You create that set of strategic themes. That's the first divisible component, if you will, from the mission, vision, and values. That's the integration of those things into some specific things that you're going to do to accomplish the vision and or the mission. And then within the strategic themes, we will have strategic objectives. Again, those are like the DNA of the strategy. There'll be continuous improvement activities that you need to do within a strategy pillar to help you get to the results of that strategy pillar. So when we build a corporate strategy map, let's say we had 3 strategic themes, and each of those strategic themes has a set of objectives. We will integrate the 3 sets of objectives into the corporate strategy map. And that represents the highest level story, if you will, of the value of this organization, of how this organization creates value. So think of strategic objectives as the building blocks of the strategy.
Mm-hmm. What should we do to improve strategy execution in an environment that does not take strategy as its main task?
If you apply some of these tools we've talked about, let's for a minute assume that you haven't gone through this rigorous process of creating a strategy. You might not even have what you're called a formal strategy. The reality is that you have an implicit strategy, right? And you're starting with some guidance from on top as to what we should be working on and what we should be trying to accomplish. So it may not be this formal, slick document, but the reality is, in my opinion, every organization has a strategy. Is it good? Is it articulated? Does it communicate well? Does it have all the components of strategy? Probably not, but it does represent strategy. Just remember, though, that strategy is not a set of projects. A lot of times we'll see a strategic plan, and it's just a list of 50 things that the organization is going to work on. That's not their strategy. Excuse me. The strategy is not just a set of projects and programs. It's really a choice that you've made on how you're going to get from where you are today to some future point, point B from point A. What's the road look like? What is the way you're going to get there? And then the specifics of how you're going to get there, in terms of activities, programs, projects, become the elements. It becomes the plan, if you will. But strategy at the highest level is making choices and deciding what not to do in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, and what the general route is to get you to that end point.
Yeah. We have room to take one more, and it's from Stephen, and he says, what is the single most important development that is still needed for the field of strategy execution?
I think the single most thing needed for strategy is to get some common definitions of terms. What we have found over the years is people don't pay very good attention to the dictionary, for the lexicon, and it's very easy. I've been in organizations where I talk to the C-level folks, and they're talking about goals, and I go down one floor in the building, and people are talking about objectives. It turns out they're talking about the same thing, they're just using different words for it. So getting a common understanding of whatever you decide is a goal or an objective or the other terms is a critical first step. The other thing that I think would help a lot, and I'd like to see more of, is what I call small team meetings aimed around strategy. Strategy tends to lose its power as it goes down in the organization. It's easy to talk about it with the C-level folks and with managers and directors and so on, and everybody sort of nods their head. But then that translation, when it gets down to workers and the desktop and the shop floor, is, I think, the one great area where improvement can be made. And by being more specific about those goals, spending more time on that, not just writing a glossy document called a plan, but actually thinking through what that goal means, what is the capacity that we have, and the capability as an organization to deliver on that goal. What are the skill sets of the employees that we have who are going to ask to work on that goal? And all of those things come about from deeper conversations. So I think to me, the holy grail in this whole process is deeper conversations that are disciplined and organized around specific topics, and then follow up with strategy review meetings to make sure that strategy actually does get cascaded to the lower level. A strategy management office can help in this regard, where you actually set up a group of folks to not just to create the word, but spread the word and communicate the word, and more importantly, take feedback, find chinks in the armor. I like to say that the problems that need to be solved. So I think those are the things that that are most important on strategy execution. I think the other thing is recognizing that it's not just about leadership and governance and project management. As I mentioned at the start, so much of the literature is just written about being a better leader, be a better communicator, be a better project manager. Those things are important, but they are they're pieces of a puzzle, and the mosaic has got a whole bunch of pieces in it that have to work in sync and correctly to be successful with strategy execution. That's why we've expanded it with those 5 imperatives, because it's not just about, a few things that's going to create a difference. But the other thing you can do, make sure you order them, right? You could easily end up thinking about 100 projects that we're going to take on to improve strategy execution. You have to have some filters in place to decide what to work on first with limited resources. So that, and that's what the roadmap is designed to do, sort through all the things you could do to come up with a set of things that make the most sense to work on first.
Okay, so I think we're out of time. If you did not get your questions answered, feel free to send us a line and we'll try to respond as best as possible to your queries. Don't be a stranger, reach out to us. Thank you so very much for that, Howard. It's always a pleasure to have you. A wealth, as I said, of information and experience, and is always welcomed. So if you want to hear more on the topic of strategy execution, the obstacles, the solutions that we have, please join us. Come experience the Caribbean Strategy Summit next month, 27th and 28th at the Royalton. And on that note, I'd go ahead and share screen if that's okay with you, Howard. And just run through briefly for those of you who are interested in attending. So our theme, we mentioned already, heavily on strategy execution. Previous to this, our themes were on strategic planning itself, as well as key performance indicators, strategic performance management. This year is on the execution, and we know a lot of organizations have been having challenges with the execution. The strategic planning, coming up with the plans, operational or other, that's the easy part. But the execution, and I did see a question on that, that's where it falls. And this is where the summit is going to help you guys. So this is our St. Lucia edition. We've done it hybrid over the last 2 years. This year, we're taking it to St. Lucia. We were based in Trinidad previously. Event 1 is the symposium, or what you may call the conference. That's on the 27th, as I mentioned. On the 28th, or on day 2, will be the strategy execution essentials course, where you get to go into more tools and techniques from the Balanced Scorecard Institute, facilitated by one of their senior associates. So you can look out for that. Now you can attend either or both, but to get the meat out of it, we would propose that you would try to attend both. These are our collaborators, major partners. We definitely have one from St. Lucia, that's HR Wise, and they will be helping us in terms of getting the word out and ensuring that all of the professionals from the St. Lucia market attend this very, very poignant event. So it is I introduced myself earlier, founder of the CSS. And for me, starting off the summit was with the impetus that we need to get our executives, our leaders, more into the strategic planning, giving them the tools that they need. Yes, they've been to strategy execution planning sessions, they've gone off to retreats, but at the end of the day, there's still something lacking. And so we have decided to bring that to the Caribbean and revive that in the Caribbean, I should say, and using tried and proven tools and methodology. So we will have some lectures on strategy execution from our BSI experts throughout the day on day 1, but we'll also have some panelists from the region, the Caribbean region, because we want to hear from our own people what they have been doing on the strategy execution front, getting some insights as to what has worked for them, what has not worked for them, What are some of the tools that they've implemented or used in their strategic planning and execution from varying industries? So far, we have banking, telecommunications, and I think utilities, just to name a few. So in terms of our keynotes, these are the topics. And again, if you need more info on either day 1 or day 2, or even the topics, agenda, etc., please feel free to visit our landing page, www.strategyplusconsulting.org, and you'll be able to get some more on these. Our international speakers, of course, hailing from the Barnes Scorecard Institute, a part of the Strategy Management Group. You heard from Howard today. Last week we heard from David. And on June 12th, we'll be hearing from Adam. Topics again that we'll cover for our Red Strat table. That's where we have our panelists discussions. It's on leadership and governance and strategy execution, creating a performance culture. I know a lot of you would have asked questions surrounding that. Yes, we want to do our strategic planning, we want to execute, but major obstacle is culture. Major obstacle is getting the buy-in from the organization at the varying levels, from cook to bottle washer. I literally saw someone ask a question specific using that, taking it to a cook, like how do you get them to buy in and understand and to really live your strategy in the end. And lastly, aligning and operationalizing strategy. So some of the speakers that have confirmed thus far, we usually have a total of 9 to 12. We have from Banking, Janine, we have the consultancy and our collaborator, HRWise. We have Salt Petroleum. We have telecommunications, which is Digicel, and then aviation with Kurt Halen from BVI, and of course, utilities with Ian. So usually we have a mix of leaders, executives, but we also like to include strategic planners, those professionals who actually live and breathe strategy and help to promote it throughout the organization, cascade it, implement successfully. So we want to hear from them as well in the region. Last year's panelists, just running through briefly. I'm not going to go through all of them. You may see some familiar faces. Again, varying industries, countries, and varying roles, of course. So a little bit more on day 2 with the strategy execution essentials. It's a one-day interactive course with a facilitator from the Barnes Scorecard Institute. We usually get a little bit into the 9 steps to success. That is their framework. However, participants would learn from each other, of course, in addition to the facilitator, and be able to at least leave with some tools that have been proven to guarantee strategy execution success. Yeah. If we went a little bit too fast, again, feel free to visit our landing page, reach out, call, email, and we'll be able to share the course outline with you. So who should attend? Again, strategy is not relegated to the strategy management unit, and most organizations in the Caribbean do not actually have a strategy management unit, and strategy is usually housed under various functional areas. And so we encourage executive senior managers, senior professionals across the organization to attend. They all form part of the strategic planning and execution process, as you would know. And if you have sat at the table, you'd know that strategy basically touches all functions, and all functions have to get involved in that process for success. So register now. You can, you may have received correspondence from either Strategy Plus or the Barnes Scorecard Institute. If you haven't, however, again, visit the landing page. And in the meantime, be sure to register for our last webinar, Aligning and Operationalizing Strategy, on June 12th. We've already had webinar 1 and 2, as mentioned before. So thank you again for attending. Thank you. We thank you for hailing from various parts of the globe internationally. We have seen persons from the Caribbean as well, and we welcome either to attend. It's not just relegated to the Caribbean, so we look forward to seeing you guys. Have a good one and take care.